Good morning, everyone. I'm Dee Brennan, Executive Director of Rails, and this is our June member update. So we are going to start by doing a welcome, and introductions. Oh, no.
It's okay. It's okay.
We just had a little spillage here in Burridge. Don't mind us.
You got it. Sorry. Mark's gonna grab.
So I think we will start our introductions in Bolingbrook. Who's in Bolingbrook, please?
Good morning. This is Louise Savela from Rails.
This is Catherine Seelig from Lyle Library.
All right, great. Let's try Burridge here. So I'm Dee Brennan. Let's start over.
Carol Hallworth Public Library. Marina Maestas, BSL Society. Sarah Kennedy, Green Hills Public Library.
Jamie Staker, South Chicago Heights Library.
Kathy Parker, Glenwood Public Library and Rails Board. Veranda Pitchford, Rails.
Shorewood Troy Public Library, Jenny Mills.
Spiller.
Monica Harris, Schaumburg Township District Library.
Julie Rothenflue, Naperville Public Library.
Rose Chenoweth, Talking Books. Here.
Mark Hatch on the cleanup committee.
And doing a damn fine job.
Thank you.
Amanda Lafascio, Rails.
Paul Mills Palmdale.
Ryan Hebel, Rails.
Ann Slaughter Rails.
All right, great. Coal Valley, please.
Leanne Redberg, Andalusia.
Catherine Worsley, Alito.
Deb Wiffles, Geneseo Public Library.
Jeff Stafford, Coal Valley.
Judy Hutchinson, Rails.
Angela Campbell, Rock Island.
Laura Long, East Moline. Ashton Trimble, Blackhawk College.
Great, thank you. How about East Peoria?
Indeed, John Sayers, Kiwani, and one more board member meeting to go.
I'm Kim Bunner with Parlin Ingersoll Public Library in Canton.
Leanne Johnson, Peoria Public Library.
Brock Peoples, Dunlop Public Library.
Great, thank you. How about Rockford? There is nobody in Rockford. Okay. How about Wheeling?
Good morning, Dee. This is Don. We only had one person signed up, and he has not shown up at this point.
And who was that, Don? Do you know?
Todd from
Okay,
Prospect
Alex
Heights.
Todd was going to Vernon, so I think you might
Okay.
be off the hook there.
Okay,
But I'm
thanks.
glad to see you. Okay, how about in Cherry Valley Public Library District? Okay, I guess not. Is Galesburg connected yet? Galesburg is not connected yet. We are still trying. Oh, Cherry Valley, are you muted?
No one's there.
No one's there. Okay. Illinois State Library.
They're muted.
I think you're muted, State Library.
Maybe they're coming late.
I see them.
Where?
Aren't they right there? Oh no, that's the
Libs,
All right.
LaSalle. I thought
How
that
about
was it, too.
Kankakee? We'll find the State Library later. Kankakee?
This is Steve Bertrand in Kankakee, all by my lonesome.
All right. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
How about LaSalle Public Library? All right. Well, hopefully we'll get that sorted out. How about New Lenox?
Okay. Good morning, Dee. This is Joe Philippek from Rails.
This is Leslie Lovato from Shorewood.
Lauren Offerman from Three Rivers.
Noreen Bormett from Peatone.
Rich Ashley from Fossil Ridge Public Library District, where imagination begins.
Imagination, I believe.
That must be a title.
Great. Okay. Thank you. How about Quincy Public Library? Anybody in Quincy?
Yes, there's several.
Do you see them?
And the where the red dot is.
There's 4 or 5 at least.
Top right. We're seeing you. Were they muted?
They're muted on their end.
Okay,
You're muted, Quincy.
They're waving.
We see you. Try to unmute yourselves.
They're saying we don't know how.
On the microphone, there's a button you can press, or on the remote for the Polycom system.
How about Sterling Public Library?
Linda Dallin, Mills and Petrie Memorial Library, Ashton. Just me.
Okay, great, thank you. How about Sycamore?
Sycamore is here. Clinton is here from Waterman. Nancy from Waterman and Peggy from Malta.
All right, great, thank you. How about Vernon?
Good morning, Dee. This is Mary Wood from Rails. Go to my right here.
Oh, Alex Stott from Prospect Heights. I'm shaking off those bus tracks from when I got thrown under one just now.
All right.
Mary Jo Matusik. I'm from Meridian Middle School. I'm also a board member.
Jan Vandekar from Park Ridge.
David Archer from Cook Memorial.
Robbie Thomas, Grace Lake Library.
Kathy Labuda from the Antioch Library.
Debbie Baskey, Rails.
Deborah Stombries, Morton Grove.
Kay Grabby, Lake Forest.
Cindy First, Vernon area.
And that's it.
All right, thank you very much. And how about Western Illinois University? No one's there. Okay.
Someone's at Cherry Valley now.
So let's go back and see if, do we have Cherry Valley? Do we have Galesburg? No. Do we have the State Library?
Muted right now.
How about LaSalle? All right. Okay. So, as usual, the technology is our friend, but it is a challenge and an opportunity, or perhaps it's an opportunity and a challenge. I'm not sure which it is more of. I want to thank you all for coming. I know that you passed up the Blackhawks parade in order to attend the member update, and we all certainly appreciate that. Especially Veranda here.
Go sports.
Sports fan.
Love sports.
So I'm going to give you a very brief update on some Rails news because we do want to spend the vast majority of our time today talking about the system membership standards. The agenda calls for an Illinois budget update. I don't really have an update. We're all waiting for information just like everybody else is. So there really isn't much else to say about that, although I'm happy to answer any questions, but I don't know that there's just no information right now. We're waiting to see what the legislature and the governor are going to do. In terms of other news, we're continuing to work on all of our projects. The overlay project. We're having a board meeting tomorrow. They're going to be discussing outsourcing delivery in the Wheeling area, as I'm sure many of you know. We also, tomorrow is the last board meeting for a number of our board members. John Sayers and Bill Coffey, who is our president, and Murray Barr and Ben Shapiro, who is the treasurer. We're very sorry to lose them, but we are having some wonderful new board members come on, some of whom are in this room, and so that's pretty much the news from Rails. Anybody have any questions at this point about anything in general? All right, then. I think we will just jump right into the membership standards. And we're going to be talking about the work that's been going on since last December. There's going to be various people from the different sites who have been working on this, who will be talking about what's been going on and what we have accomplished. I know that there are a lot of questions out there and concerns, doubts, etc., about the idea of system membership standards beyond what we currently have in place, and which are the standards that are related to the agency certification that we do every January through March. But we think that we will be able to answer a lot of your questions today. At the very least, we'll certainly begin to understand more about what your concerns are, and we'll be able to incorporate your feedback into the work that we are going to be continuing to do. Because I want to stress very strongly that we are only in the beginning stages, that we are, this is the reason that we're having this update is so that we can just share some very preliminary information with you, and as I say, then incorporate your feedback into the standards. I also want to say that these standards are designed to be very inclusive and not exclusive. This is not about kicking libraries out of systems. It is not about that at all. It's about helping libraries do a better job of serving their communities, because no matter how good a job we do, we can always do a better job. So we are going to be showing you a PowerPoint, just because I think it helps to reinforce and helps to clarify things that we're saying as opposed to us just talking at you. And we're going to be going back and forth from that PowerPoint. You can put it up now if you want, Ryan. So that you can, as I say, see some of the high-level kind of bullet points that we want to talk to you about. These are our goals. This has been, from the very beginning, the goal for this work, and all the committee members, all 42 of them,
Yes.
Are very much behind this and believe this, that we are trying to create a pathway to excellence for Illinois libraries through standards that are achievable but still aspirational, and that the system will support libraries. We will provide the assistance to help them serve their communities better. So, as I said, we're going to be going back and forth from this PowerPoint to the speakers, so please bear with us. You can find this PowerPoint also posted on L2 in the entry for the member update. And also, as always, if you're streaming or if you want to email any question or comment that you might have, you can do that at any time during the session by emailing feedback@railslibraries.info. And I think Mary and Anne are monitoring that email, so we will certainly be happy to answer questions, whether they're, in person, virtually, or via email. Okay, so let's move right along to the next slide.
You see, I didn't say anything.
So these are the existing standards, and so we're going to just talk a little bit about them. And I'm sure a lot of you are pretty much aware of these, or if not all of you. And so Veranda is going to give us a short, brief even, overview of these, and then Kathy Parker, who is actually the chair of the System Membership Standards Committee, is going to talk about some of the challenges that they present, which is really the kind of the why, a lot about the why we're doing this. So Veranda.
Okay. I will keep my comments to under an hour about the existing standards. Okay, so you have them on the screen in front of you. As a reminder, when the systems merged to be in the Heartland area and in the Rails area, every system had different standards. So what was decided in an effort to move the merger along, was to revert back to the standards that are listed in the administrative code. So what you see, libraries following the Illinois Interlibrary Loan Code, bibliographically organized collection, libraries open at least 15 hours a week, that's staffed by one or more employees serving as the librarian, working at least those 15 hours, etc., are the standards listed in the administrative code under the definition for a library. As some of you may have surmised from this, they're a bit bare bones, and some of these definitions, for example, bibliographically organized collection, aren't clearly defined in the standards, which sometimes presents a problem for a challenge for libraries actually meeting the basic information needs of their patrons. And as well as being staffed by one or more employees can present some challenges as well.
So we just wanted you to see this too, because this is sort of the way that existing standards for different agencies or different types of libraries kind of all sort of, feed together. It's kind of complex, as you can see, and that makes the work of doing any sort of updating of them or addition to them also kind of complex. So, Kathy, you want to talk about some of the challenges?
Yeah, what we've been finding through the years that Rails has merged, which has been 4 years now, I think, is that the standards are very basic. And in many of the libraries, whether they're the publics, the specials, the schools, there's been a deterioration of knowledge. As people have moved on to other positions or have retired, people coming in, there's a lack of knowledge in a variety of ways. And it isn't necessarily a small library versus a large library. It really is, even in the larger libraries, there's a lack of knowledge. And in order to serve our patrons in whatever library you're in, you need to have a basic knowledge to do that. So there's been it's been a concern of mine for a long time as in the public library director, seeing that there have been people coming into the libraries who don't know the base legal knowledge, human resources knowledge just to run the library. But even in the schools and in the academics and in the specials, there have been some complete deterioration of anyone even in a library. I mean, a lot of schools have, because of funding, no longer have a librarian. So that's impacting the children in the community as well. And if there's no children in the librarians in the schools, and then we have lesser standards in the public area, it's affecting the entire community. So just looking at that, Dee and I have had a lot of conversations about what can we do? Can we do something to make the standards a little stronger so that we can serve our patrons better, and then get that knowledge base, however we do that, get that back to our members so that we can then serve our patrons better.
Exactly. It's all about serving the library users better. And, I know that, people that some of my colleagues, our colleagues, are worried about, requiring certain educational degrees, etc. This is not about having to have an MLS in every library. It is not about that. So that's kind of why we got started. So it's time for some questions. Do you have any questions at this point about why we're doing this, or any general concerns that you want to express at this point? There'll be plenty of opportunity later on. Okay, then I think that we will move on. Okay. So this is where we're going to tell you some information about the System Membership Standards Committee, and I'm going to let Kathy talk about this as the chair.
Right. So we formed the System Membership Standards Committee last year, and we met in the end of the year last year as well. And during that time, we were looking at not just about who's leading the libraries, but what other standards that we have within our library. So, we have our collections, we have our customers, our facilities, our funding, our professional leadership, and then getting to the leadership, the training and certification. So we really looked at, with our committee of 42, what we can do, and we did split it up by these particular topics. And because we definitely want to have, some basic standards, or something a little, depending on where we're at, for each of these subcommittees, and moving those to making us stronger as libraries for our patrons and as staff members serving our patrons. So when we met, these were kind of the areas that we were considering, we have decided to move into and work very hard to come up with what we have so far, which is still pretty basic. I mean, we're still beating those up pretty well. Coughing.
And yes, and so these committees have met, I think most of them have met twice, is that right?
For funding.
Funding has only met once because we kind of realized at that first meeting that the funding was going to be very dependent on what the other standards might be. I mean, if there was going to be a standard about a collection, a percentage, or staffing, number of staff, obviously that was going to drive the funding one. So we decided to kind of hold back on that committee until we could get some more information. But the others have met twice, and we've had very good discussions. And these are some principles that we wanted to share with you, and these came from our discussions with the committee. And these are sort of they are the principles that underlie the standards. And you can see, that they are aspirational, they are realistic, that there should be qualitative, and if possible, some formulas, but also qualitative, that they need to be achievable. They should make it possible for all types of libraries and budget sizes and populations served to participate in all three categories, which we'll say more about in a little bit. They're not one size fits all. And they reference, the existing law and code whenever relevant. And obviously for libraries like, some special libraries, like hospital libraries, I think, or medical libraries have very specific standards, or law libraries, then libraries need to meet the requirements for their own type. We're not going to, we can't speak for the accrediting bodies.
Dee, I also wanted to, as I was reading through this, just to let the membership know that even the formation of the committee, we looked at volunteers from every type of library, every size library. So of those 42 committee members, there's a good representation of our school libraries, our academics, our specials, our publics, and various sizes of library as well, and within parts of rail. So it's not just a suburban area. It's some of our outlying libraries as well that are much more removed from the suburban area. And during the process, we were all very cognizant of being as inclusive as possible of every type of library and every library situation that we have in our system.
Yes, most definitely. And that's why, 42, it's a lot of people, but we wanted to be sure that everybody who was interested in participating could. So I mentioned categories, so Veranda's going to just talk about this a little bit to explain how they work.
Great. So in working with all of the committees, we worked with a multitude of sources at a local, Illinois, nationally, and even international level, and we across library types. And what we wanted to do was find something to help group libraries together. And just to give you a quick definition of these, the basic category, a library that operates at the essential yet minimal level in meeting customer need. The proficient library would be a library operating at an efficient level in meeting customer need. And the exemplary library is strategic and anticipating need for customer services. These three categories, again, we looked at a lot of different types and resources are specifically from the Illinois School Media Library Association, Linking for Learning. These are the categories, which is a great resource specifically for school libraries, but these are the categories used in that resource to support library development in terms of standards.
So now we're going to turn to some members of the committees to talk about the work from their point of view. And I think Jenny and Julie are going to talk about the content and collections.
Julie's having a much better day than I am.
Well, I think it's really important that we were looking at what is achievable, but what also is aspirational. And I think one of the things a lot of us felt on the whole committee was these are not meant to be difficult for people, but what we wanted people to have, the staff in the library, was ammunition to go to their governing body to say, these are standards we have to accomplish. These are things that certainly throughout Rails and hopefully throughout the state at some point, that are expectations for a library. So that was a lot of our thought as well. It wasn't meant to be something difficult, but meant to be ammunition for someone to go to that governing body and say, look, we need more funding so we can meet even the basic, wherever it might be. So I think it's also important when we talked about particularly, say, a percentage of budget to spend on materials in our group. We did look at the information from IPLR, which was very helpful. So it helped us to really be realistic. And looking at that data, we could see, okay, where are libraries already on their spending? You know, and so we wanted it to be very achievable. So by using data already available, I think we were able to look at things so that they were very achievable. But I think, again, it comes down to what is going to really serve your community. What is really going to give them the best type of library service that they can get. And I think that's really where most of us are coming from, is if we have to raise the bar, that's fine, but we also have many levels of bars to raise, so there's plenty there to do for everybody. There isn't anybody that's going to be able to walk in and say, oh yeah, we've got it made, we're proficient in everything. So, and that's good, that's what it should be. You should always be striving to be the best you can be. But it is, I think it's going to be achievable. And I think what's also important is the support from the system that's going to be there for people to help them get there. And from each other. I mean, we are all very collaborative, and we all can share resources and information and do mentoring, whatever it takes to help people move along in this process.
And I think that at least for me, I think that a recognition of looking at content and collections is important because that's really key to what we do. If we have no content, no collections, then we can just close our doors and go home. So we did set specific spending standards, and this is obviously, I think, open to discussion later. Nothing's set in stone, like Dee said. But we would be looking at, an 8% spending of budget on collections at a basic level, which is lower than the current state standards. But we're trying to kind of get libraries that maybe aren't there yet, as sort of an aspirational goal for where they can go. For proficient libraries, it would be the 12% that's in the state standards. And
Guideline, that's in serving our public.
Yes,
Yep.
Sorry, guidelines. And then 16% for exemplary libraries. So there's a pathway to sort of going up and achieving more, but we don't want anybody to feel like they have to spend more than what they have. Other basic core things that you need to do with your collection is you need to, have one. It needs to meet the needs of your public or whoever you're serving. So if you're a school library, we don't expect you to have large print adult novels, but if you're a public library, you should be meeting all of your needs and all of the community that you're serving. That it's discoverable online. So basic core things to help your patrons have the materials that they need and want, and how to effectively find them.
Yeah, and I think when we talked about meeting the community's needs, and this is my personal bugaboo, is that means what do they want? What do they think they need? Not what we think they need. So you're meeting their self-defined needs, not some. something defined by somebody else.
And something that I think that Julie brought up in the, for the proficient level, you have to go through sort of a content analysis of your collection to say, you know, nobody really wants these dusty books that nobody's touched in 20 years. You have to have a regular weeding plan. You have to assess where your users are and where their content needs may be going.
Anything else?
So these are just some example of the kinds of standards that this subcommittee focused on. Jenny was talking about the percentages. As you guys said, it was very much based on IPLAR, and I think by default, a lot of this is very public-oriented because that's where a lot of us are or came from. But we have certainly, considered all types. As Kathy said, we had a lot of people from different types of libraries on the committees, but it's still evolving. Just last week, Veranda and I met with some staff of ACRL to talk about standards for college and research libraries, and we also then talked to Sylvia Norton, who is the director of the American Association of School Librarians, about school library standards. So, we're still, I can't again stress enough that this is very much in the beginning stages. So, okay, so thanks you guys. We're going to move to customers now. Are you talking about this, Veranda?
I am.
Okay.
So you have the draft standards in front of you. Customers are treated equally. Library ensures the safety of customers and staff. Library provides consistent and courteous customer service. I think this dovetails nicely on what both Julie and Jenny to what they were referring to in terms of meeting the need of, in the public setting, meeting the need of customers where they are. However, we try to, and I hope it's reflected in the draft standards you see, work across library type. And again, I can't stress enough that these are just excerpted draft standards of what will eventually you'll see more of. Also, I just wanted to say a couple of other things. In that we were also working to consider the needs of customers who are served virtually as well, and how we could ensure they receive service, and again, working across type as being a big piece of this, as Dee referred to in the meetings we've had with other groups.
Thank you, Veranda.
My pleasure.
All right, next is facilities, and we're Alex Todd from Mount Prospect.
Prospect
and
Prospect Heights.
I'm sorry, Prospect Heights. I apologize. I was right about the Prospect part.
Hey, Dee.
Yes.
Oh, this is Liz South. So you can hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. We're going to mute.
Okay.
A LaSalle shout out. That's
good. And so Alex from Prospect Heights and Lauren Offerman from the Three Rivers Public Library District, they're going to talk about facilities. And again, these are just some very basic, just some examples of the standards. So take it away. I don't know who's going first.
I guess I will. I'd like to thank Emily, Veranda, and Dee for not losing their combined faculties in facilitating the facilities subcommittee's discussion on library space. I think is the good word for doing that. We were lucky, I think, in that there were some resources that we were able to pull upon, serving our public. Iowa has some standards, and Massachusetts had some standards, but they were all for public libraries. And so we needed to make sure, and I think we did a good job of emphasizing the non-public libraries and trying to phrase some of these standards in a generic enough way that they could apply to a corporate library in a skyscraper, in addition to a public library on Main Street. Some of the main things that we talked about were the number of hours that a library should be open, and we kind of broke them up along the lines of how they are in serving our public. But we emphasized the portions of the day. So it's not just the number of hours that a library should be open, but that they should be open some evening and weekend hours in every situation. And then we expanded that out. One of the other things that we concentrated on is the fact that not every library is going to be able to meet every single criteria listed here. And so what we still want to do is work on a rating scheme so that a library needs to reach 100 points. And each criteria has a certain number of points, and so they can pick and choose how they want to meet the standard for each threshold by doing it. So maybe not everybody can have X number of parking spaces. So instead they have to concentrate on some of the other criteria. And in that way, we think we give the libraries enough flexibility to make sure that their spaces stay unique enough for their own needs. So, Laura, did you have anything you want?
Yeah, you pretty much covered everything, Alex. Thank you. Nice job. And but I just wanted to stress too how we're trying to emphasize that with a library's facilities, oftentimes it is you have what you have, and that's what you have to work with. And so I think it's important to realize that, like you said, we are working on a kind of rating scale. Like you're not going to be able to meet every single criteria that we come up with, but try and see, how to work with what you have and how to maybe plan for improvement in the future, that type of thing. And I also just want to kind of echo what Jenny and Julie and Veranda have said so far, that trying to recognize the different types of libraries and accommodate the very different functions that some of them might perform. But like Alex said, I think we have a pretty good representation in our group, and so hopefully that comes through with the criteria that we've come up with. That's all.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So
Dee?
we're going to now talk.
Dee?
Yes.
Can we
Yes.
have a question about? We have a question here at Vernon about what was just said.
The second standard under facilities.
Oh, the question was to expand a little bit more on the library has a presence in its community beyond the physical facility. And I think that was more of remote access for databases to bringing. So being a library these days isn't just bringing people into the actual facility, but allowing access at a point of need. And so that might just be having a booth at the Rotary Pancake Breakfast where you have your 3D printer set up, or even just flyers for summer reading, or making sure that the databases you subscribe to can be accessed remotely, to just visiting the schools to sign kids up for library cards. So it's not just, the facilities are not just here, but expanding the facility, the concept of facility outside of the building.
And to give just another example of that, I visited the McQuan Library last week or the week before. McQuan is a little bit south of Galesburg, and the community is less than 300 people there. But they have, and I went there to give them a foam check because they are joining RSA. But they have an extremely active Facebook page. So their catalog is not yet online, but they definitely have a very active presence in the community because they have a Facebook page where they post all kinds of information about events that are going on. And, one of the posts was, we have 6 new Westerns. Please come in and check them out. I mean, they were really, they were on it. They were, you don't have to be big to have a Facebook page. So, or you can be big and have a Facebook page. So I think that's another kind of example of how you can be outside of your building, no matter how much money you have or don't have or how big or small you are. We could, maybe we should stop for questions right now because we're giving you a lot of information, or trying to. So I think we'll pause and ask for feedback. Does anybody have a question out there?
We have another question at
here.
Vernon D. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I just, going back to the content section, they mentioned that one of the criteria was meeting the needs of the community, and I just wondered, are they planning to have some sort of measurements, like, how many holds there are, or how your frequency of interlibrary loan, are they going to try to measure if a person is meeting or they need, or is it just something that is completely subjective and yes, I am?
I think that's a really good idea. I know in some consortia they have to, I belong to the Pinnacle Consortia, and we have to be able to show that so much of our stuff that crosses our desks has to be from our library, not from our partners. And I think that's something that we can definitely look at. Like we said, we only met twice, but I think that is a good idea.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to some of the specifics, but we do want to try to have things be measurable. So that is a really good idea.
I think, again, that might vary by type as well. Mm-hmm. That's it.
This is
Are there...
Steve. This
yes,
is Steve.
go ahead.
This is a little bit off topic, but when you go over to the PowerPoint, my screen goes blank. I don't know if anybody else is having this problem. I brought the PDF up on my iPad here, so I'm following along fine, so it's not an immediate need. I'm following along, but I'm not getting getting your PowerPoint, so that's just a technical concern.
Okay.
Well, thank you for letting me know that.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Sorry about that, everyone. We've been talking as if you could all see it, and maybe some of you can, or maybe none of you can, and I do apologize. Yes, Monica.
Hi, Monica Harris from Schaumburg Township District Library. I have a question also about the collections breakdown. So when you're talking about material, in addition to physical material, what kinds of things are we thinking about in terms of content that counts towards the percentages?
We're also thinking things like e-books, e-content, audiobooks, any format that a library might collect.
So e-content, database subscription, I would think. What about other kinds of content that libraries are experimenting with in terms of the kind of content where their public is creating things and the cost that go towards
actually
those
towards
things
the exemplary,
also
that
included?
Yeah.
Great to hear.
It's both the ability for users to create content and the ability for them to share it.
Right. So costs that might be associated with the library's digital media lab or something, for instance, might also go towards these kinds of percentages?
Interesting idea. Yep.
Okay.
That's great feedback. Yeah. Yep. Are there other questions at this point? There'll be opportunities later, but we're happy to take questions now as well.
This is Sarah at Sycamore. I was just, I guess I'd be really curious to see what so far has been come up with. Everything seems very general, and so I'm still not sure exactly where things are going, so it's hard for me to give feedback. The one thing that I did hear about the book budgets and being basic, proficient, and exemplary, I guess basing it on a percentage concerns me a little bit, because a budget of $1 million, spending 16% of your budget, is very different than a budget of $200,000 spending 16% of your budget, or 8%. And somebody, who has a large budget, 16% is huge amounts of money going into materials, which may or may not be truly valuable to your library's collection. But 8% from a small library that has a smaller budget, especially if it's a newer one, may not be enough to be spent because they're trying to build their collection. or a library that is bursting at the seams can't, every time they put a book in, they have to pull a book out. So they could, you know, they may be exemplary in the reality of their size of community, but when you base it on a percentage, I'm not sure that necessarily truly works. My opinion.
And I think we really wrestled with this. I think we did look at IPLAR data, so we know that there is some basis for believing that most libraries are in this range, at least public libraries. Interestingly, when we met with the ACRL people, they thought these numbers were horribly low. So this is where it may get very tricky, and we may have to divide it up more by library type. But 12% is what is in serving our public as a guideline, a minimum. And this is why we have different levels too. I mean, from my perspective, anyway.
I think one of the other things when we've talked about it is you wouldn't necessarily have to meet every single quality or benchmark to go to the next level. So, if you do all these other things right, and yes, if you determine for your community you're spending what you need to spend, that doesn't mean you can't move on to the next level.
But this was, in effect, the percentages were trying to give you some quantitative look back. You could say enough for your library, and that's really hard to quantify. So I guess we don't know that percentages are necessarily the best way to look at it either. I agree with a lot of your points, Sarah. But I think we were struggling with how to quantify that. So I know that Dee and Veronda would love to listen to feedback on how you could maybe look at it in a different way.
I was just also going to say, as Kathy talked about the challenges with existing standards, I've had, not in public library settings, but in school library settings, when, in my experience, in talking with some superintendents about what they need to do to qualify as a Rails member to have access specifically to school per capita funds, frankly, the standards that are currently in place say to them, I don't really have to have a librarian. And what we wanted to do is give some quantitative, I can't think of a better word, ammunition to our members, and I don't know if those percentages work as well in a school setting, because we had a challenge getting data for Illinois school libraries, but we wanted to give them something to be able to present to an administrator to say, this is what a quality library looks like, and even maybe in a public setting to give to a decision maker or a local government leader. That's the goal of these guiding and sometimes aspirational kind of quantitative numbers.
I do not disagree one iota. I think we need standards. I desperately believe that we need these standards, because whether you are a small library who's struggling to, or a school library struggling to get their administration to put money toward it, you need some standards to back you up. Whether, or if you are a mid-sized library who wants to grow, it's a lot easier to grow when you can say, well, the standards is we want to grow, here's how our standards go up. I agree wholeheartedly. I think part of my problem, and somebody said, well, there's other things, you don't have to meet every one of these, some of them. I don't know what they all are. I guess for me, I would love to see where you are with all of your things. I still am only hearing generalities that are leaving me confused as to what the standards you're coming up with are. And I'm curious. I believe very strongly that we should have these standards. I am all for it. I'm still confused. That's where I am on this.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. That's good feedback. I think, the committee is a big committee. They have not, they're meeting together again just for the second time next month. And, you know, frankly, I have been reluctant to share too much. I'm sure you can understand this too, because these are very, very, very drafty. And, you know, we send something out and immediately it becomes fact, done. It's a done deal. You know, why didn't you ever ask me? So I hope you can understand that we're being just a little bit cautious, but I think after the committee has had a chance to look at it all, we certainly don't want anybody to be confused, but we don't want anybody to think that we're done with this either.
The full committee hasn't met since December, so the full committee hasn't seen all of the standards either. only a few of us have, and really it's been mostly the Rails staff.
Well, I sent it out yesterday, but that was
the first time.
Right.
So the full committee hasn't even had a chance to really hash out the full details. The subcommittees have worked and hashed out quite a bit, but we still need to meet together before we can get some more. And actually this meeting today is going to give us some feedback to go back and kind of maybe tweak what we've already come up with so far and make them, you know, that much better, because we'll have this feedback.
Yes, Marina.
Maybe you've already explored some of this, but I don't know your name from New. Mentioned the definition of community needs. And if there were some criteria or some sort of questions we could standardly ask about our own community, our individual libraries are serving, and then maybe dovetailing with size and, you know, quantity.
That's a good idea.
Might be able to frame it so that we have something definite by which to go by.
Great idea. Thank you. So if you can, you know, Sarah and everyone, if you can just bear with us until after July 13th, I think we'll be able to give you a lot more specific information at that point. Are there other questions at this time?
Dee, we had a comment from a streamer. They are not able to see the PowerPoint as well. If you could, when possible, just briefly summarize what's on the screen.
Okay, sure. Thank you. And the PowerPoint is available in there's a link in L2. So
yes, and I did send them the link, but just in case they can't.
Sure, we can do that going forward. Okay, so I think we will move on then to our next topic. We just did facilities, right? So our next one is funding, and I guess we'll put the PowerPoint up, even though most people can't see it. But as I say, it is an L2. And basically, funding, you'll see there is, as I described to you, as I said earlier, this committee only met once because we knew that the other standards were going to drive the funding standards. And so at this point, really the only thing that we're saying is that the library has adequate funding to provide services and resources that meet the reasonable expectations of library users. And I don't know, define reasonable, but this is actually a standard I think it's an ACRL standard somewhere. And the library budget provides appropriate financial support for the library to meet other relevant system standards at the basic level, the proficient level, or the exemplary level. So it's very much, in terms of funding, driven by what the other standards are. So that's all we have for funding right now. So I think we will move on to one of the hotter topics, which is professional leadership and training. And let me just see, I know that Kathy Parker and Mary Jo Matusik, who's both are board members, Kathy from Glenwood Linwood Library and Mary Jo from, let me see, Aptakisik CCSD 102.
It's very good.
So
hard to say Aptakisik.
who's going to go? Okay, Mary Jo is going to go first. Okay.
All right. We wanted to be inclusive rather than exclusive. We didn't want to say everybody in the public library has to have an LA master's because we know that's not reality. We want them to have some basic training and basic knowledge in that position. We know that we have a lot of new library administrators coming in. Some have been in the state, some know the laws, some don't. So we're hoping that our new people who come in to administrator roles, especially in the public library, will attend the Illinois State Library Program Spill me. We want them to be able to present a positive, competent view to the public. Having basic understandings of the foundations of library science, cataloging, library administration, reference and information services. We don't expect that they will know this overnight. We're even building in time up to 2 years so that they can get some of this training. And the training would be offered by the systems or through other entities that would help us along with training. And it goes by the size of the library. Everyone from level 1, which is libraries under 5,000, all the way up to public libraries of 50,000 or more. We also looked at what schools need, and I know firsthand what's happening, and a lot of times we get classroom teachers who are suddenly thrust into the library because they can't either A, find someone, but there are more people being certified now as school librarians. They are working with them. They are coming through. Academic libraries have special needs. We're looking at their needs and what they need to have. We've used Linking and Learning, which is the Illinois School Library standards, which are part of the state code in that you're required to meet these goals and say where you're making progress in order to get the per capita grant. And that's something ISLMA have worked very hard to get done. We wanted to make sure that it was flexible enough that everyone could still be involved. We don't want to lose libraries and rails, but we want the overall level of confidence and competence to increase. Basic, proficient, and exemplary. We also looked at serving our public, which is the public library standards. So we've looked at that. We've looked at the special libraries as we've been able to make connections and collect those. So we continue to work with that. Trying to think if I've missed anything.
Mary Jo, can I interject for a second?
Yes, please.
And I just want to say that, at any department that you work in a library, you realize it's a level of knowledge that you need to do your job, whether it's working at the circulation desk, the reference desk. There's a level of knowledge, and especially when you're running the head of a library, whether it's the head of a private library or a school library or a public library or an academic, there are legal and financial and HR issues that are base knowledge you have to have. And you don't want to get your community, you don't want your library to be in a situation where you put your community or your library into a financial situation or a legal mess or, HR. That's a big legal quagmire just generally. So there is a basic level you have to know, whether you get it from a formal training through library school or from different types of certifications through ALA or LTA, whatever the case may be. There is a level needed to run any library. So that's kind of where we're coming through with all these different types of standards, is finding what those are, the basics, maybe having better, but at least a basic knowledge, so that we have people who are coming in who can say definitely, I do know the basic library laws of Illinois. I know the basic HR standards, of interviewing, of termination, things of that nature. So there are a bunch of levels that we need to cover.
Could you just read the standards, just in case people can't see them?
These?
Mm-hmm.
The screen says, for the professional leadership, it says, staff are committed to providing excellent service to all users and the library has a permanent paid administrator who has a required degree for its population group or library type.
Just for, because some people can't see the PowerPoint.
Those are just examples of the kinds of things we've been talking about.
Right.
So as I said, this is not about requiring an MLS in every library, but it is about giving people the tools they need to actually do their job. We're going to turn to Angela Campbell now from the Rock Island Public Library. Angela has a unique perspective, I think, because she worked in Iowa, where they have some pretty rigorous standards. And I think, something that I think a lot of us didn't realize when we started working on this, that just about all of our neighboring states, if not all of them, do have statewide standards. And so that was, proof to us that it can be done. It's just hard. So, Angela, you want to talk about training and certification?
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to say I'm honored to serve on this committee because I hope we can do Rails and the state of Illinois proud by implementing a set of certification standards for all types of libraries and library employees. I do come to Illinois librarianship from 15 years in Iowa libraries. In Iowa, we did have a very structured and well thought out library accreditation program and librarian certification program for public libraries. In fact, our state funding was tied to meeting certain criteria based on the size of your library's service population. And I won't lie, it was daunting the first time I had to fill out the accreditation application for my library. But on the positive side, the standards did exist, and we got the validation that we were meeting some of these standards. And it made me have new feelings about my library. I went from a very large library to a lot smaller library, and so I had different ideas on what we should be doing than what the standards stated because I had never worked in a smaller library. So it was great guidance. Essentially, it gave me direction. And I want to give a few examples of how the certification and accreditation process did help me, just to maybe ease some minds out there. For example, if my library wasn't meeting a standard, I educated my board on why it wasn't being met, why it was important to be met, and what happens if we don't meet it in the future. Many times it could change our funding, or at least our line items, how they wanted to distribute our money. So, for example, I used to have a few board members who were really adamant about spending almost all of our money on books, and then they wondered why we didn't have money for other things. Well, I told them, 21% of our budget spent on books. If we put it back to, between 8 and 10%, which was the standard, maybe we would have money for other things. And sure enough, we did. So it was a really great resource to use to explain things. And funding wise, it's just a really good argument when you're in Iowa. We're funded completely different. But when you're standing in front of city council and you're saying you don't have even close to the amount of funding you should be getting for your library, and the state says so, and our money from the state could be withheld if we don't meet that standard, we need more money, it has a lot more bearing than saying give us more money. So I really loved having the standards for that reason. And then another example of how they really helped me as a director was with staffing. Many of the staff in my smaller library didn't have an MLS, and I was the first MLS that library had ever hired, and they were kind of nervous about it. I don't want to say they felt inferior, but it was just totally different than the former director, who kind of just learned it on the job, and as she moved up through the ranks. So in Iowa, they have what we've talked about a little bit here, a certification program for all staff. And it was an achievable goal to meet via professional development and certification levels. So in other words, it gave me a more educated staff because they got to go and do these continuing ed classes, but it also gave me a staff that was really proud to achieve a librarian certification and then advance through those ranks for depending on how many years they were in the job. We started, one of the things that this subcommittee has looked at is starting with administrators and directors, and they as was just mentioned, had different, possible levels. And in Iowa, we had levels. It's kind of based off that. Whereas in level 1, you have your high school diploma or GED, and then 2 of these management courses that the state offered, and that would mean you were a level 1 librarian, up to level 6, which was your person that had an ALA accredited MLS. So how does that relate to library standards? Well, depending upon the size of the library service population, the standard is a librarian certified at an achievable level. So if your library of, say, 500 people, a service population of 500 people or less, with a level 1 librarian, they're meeting the standard just as much as a library with 50,000 or more people with a level 6 librarian is meeting the standard. So they're not competing. It's all based on your service population and what was developed. Actually, I don't know how they developed their standards, but I know they've been around for a really long time. But also moving forward, we had to keep up certification, much like teachers and nurses and firemen and police officers. And that puts us in the ranks of, we're professionals too. And we did that by taking continuing education courses. So every 3 years we had to meet a benchmark number for continuing education units or CEUs. And these were courses that were offered by the state library, or courses that we took independently that we could submit for CEUs. So if you are in a local, I was in a local like public relations organization, and somebody did a talk on social media, I could submit that as a continuing education unit just as much as if I went to the state library or and learned something. So it was very flexible, and you could certainly get those units. They weren't too hard to get. I believe that administrators had to get 46 units every 3 years and 32 units for support staff. So, it wasn't to try to make everyone crazy. It was actually to help you in your job. And I tell you all this because I just, I really believe in librarian certification, and accreditation standards are just a really wonderful way to benefit the communities we serve. So this subcommittee that I serve on, the Training and Certification Subcommittee, we had to kind of make a few assumptions when we first started to get us on track. So we decided to begin with library administrators so that the library as a whole has a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities of leadership, staff, and trustees to meet the needs of the library user. And on the PowerPoint, it lists the library system will assist staff in obtaining access and training in the following areas. And the areas that we came up with as a team, and we poured over all the different examples that we could find, are collection development, foundations of library services, cataloging and classification, reference and information services, technology, communication, library administration, which is the legal, financial, HR stuff, resource sharing, teamwork, and then we had some other ideas, and we're still kind of kicking around with the trustee training, facilities management, collaboration and partnerships, and ethics. Really, the list could be endless, and the point is that it gives variety to people who want to do continuing education. I personally would never want to take anything in cataloging and classification, but it was really necessary in my last job because I was in a small library and had to do all of that. So it would have been a blessing to have those classes. So the next steps for us is within the next, hopefully 18 months, we need to answer a lot of questions. We do know there are a lot of questions out there. Do we need other categories? And how will the certification affect Rails membership, if it does at all? What time frame would a library need to come into compliance to achieve the achievement categories of the basic, proficient, exemplary? And can we incorporate the existing certification standards that the ALA, CPLA, provides, and the support staff certifications? That's a possible partnership. Let's not reinvent the wheel here if we don't have to. And then creating an evaluation tool and process. Assessment-wise, we need to have those documents and processes in place. We were talking about, providing a letter annually to library boards, letting them know that it exists. and how to make the different levels challenging yet, easy to understand and achievable. We've done a lot of research, like I said, implementation and evaluation are our next steps. And I just want to say, I know I wouldn't be the librarian I am today without having to meet those standards in Iowa, because I was always learning new things. I mean, I can only imagine when I graduated with my MLS in 96, 97, I mean, librarianship has changed 180 degrees since then, so this has really helped keep me on track. That's what I had to say, and I mean, I personally would be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Angela. That was great. And it is, yes, actually, now we are going to stop and see if there are any questions about anything that anybody has said. Questions?
Dee, we have a question here in Vernon.
Okay.
Yeah, about going back to the professional leadership, I kind of have concerns about the 2-year window where someone can get hired as an administrator before they're qualified to be an administrator. It's kind of like what Kathy was saying. Even running a small library, you're responsible for and have the potential to do a lot of damage if you don't know the legalities or the accounting or the financial requirements of running a library. And so maybe just as you're right after that, you were talking about the training and certification, maybe combine those and put maybe some of the onus on the individual librarians who are going to be going into these jobs to have some of the certification ahead of time. So a library doesn't have to hire someone with an MLS, but they shouldn't be able to hire someone who's just worked at the library for 5 years and has no other training.
Oh, it's off at
and I think finding a middle ground where they're required to go to spill meet at the next time that happens. Maybe encouraging the Atlases and the Laconis and the other similar organizations of the state to have some more concrete training on that, to let people who might be interested or be identified as successor administrators to start getting those things before they're thrown into the fire. Because I think giving them 2 years, that's a big gap where the library potentially could be in jeopardy.
Very good feedback, Alex. Yep.
Steve, this is Nikki
Hello?
at LaSalle. Yeah, this is Nikki
Yep.
at LaSalle. LaSalle.
Yep. Hi, Nikki. Yep.
We're having to use a cell phone.
Okay.
Okay. The last presenter mentioned that in Iowa, Angela, that they had a 500 person level. Are we looking at anything like that?
I think I heard your question. What should they mute the phone?
They're reverberating on themselves.
Right.
I can mute them.
Can you mute your phone while I answer the question, LaSalle? I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't understand what the technological problem is. We'll have to figure that out after this meeting. But I think you were asking about whether we might be proposing different levels based on population. And the answer to that is yes. We would have. We haven't, come to any conclusions or decisions, but the idea is that smaller libraries would be required to have, as Angela referenced, a high school degree or some college courses as you progress up as your population size increases. And along with that, you would be, expected to take training in the areas that Angela was listing out. And that's not a definitive list at this point, just some examples of things that we think people need to know in order to run a library. I hope that answers your question.
Dee, we have a couple more questions, and Vernon.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay.
Would the standards that relate to people working in libraries go beyond just the administrator, say to the head of the cataloging department, the reference department, even down to page level? Because I know Wisconsin does that.
That's a really good question, and I think what the committee, the subcommittees have kind of talked about up to this point is that we need to get the kind of the administrator piece done first. We do believe in the kind of, I think, continuing education that Angela was describing that Iowa does, and that as you say a lot of other states do. It just seemed like we needed to get the kind of the basic minimal thing in place first, and then move forward with the rest of it.
Job descriptions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have, this is Cindy from Vernon. I have two questions. One is, well, two questions and a comment. First, thank you for the committee and for everyone that's been working on this to get this started, and I echo Sarah's comments earlier. I think this is a really important and it's a real asset what you're doing. I think it's a really a good long time coming. I think it's a very good thing. And then my two questions. First is, do you have a tentative timeline where you see this process being finished and adopted? Is this something you're hoping to roll out in the next fiscal year, or like 2 years from now? Kind of, that's question one. And then the second question is, who will provide the training and who will track and verify that people have taken these classes? Because it's a big state, and right now everybody's broke, and who's going to actually do this? So those are my two questions.
All right. Well, those are great questions because they're what I wanted to talk about next. So thank you very much, Cindy. And, Kathy and I are kind of laughing because Kathy wanted this to be done last December, so we're a little behind our schedule.
Behind my time frame.
Yep. But I am hoping that we will have something that we can present to the membership, the board, whatever, in the fall, at least as a preliminary draft, as something to look at. So that's pretty soon, actually. And in terms, I'll answer your second question, and then I'll go back to fully answer the first one. We had a meeting with some staff at the American Library Association, because they do have, as I think a lot of you would know, they have a certified public library administrator program. Is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. The CPLA. And then they have the library support.
Right. Then they have the library support staff certification. And so what we were talking to them about was a kind of a hybrid of those two things, at least to get us started. And the potential, beauty of this is that ALA has already developed this training, or has access to it, and so we don't have to reinvent it and find trainers, et cetera, et cetera. They would also do all the tracking, which is fabulous. And it's a goal of theirs, because they would like to be able to provide to individual librarians or library staff a sort of a kind of like if you can pass the bar and then you can be able to practice law in other states. They would like to be able to do this. Would be their first kind of statewide or regional whatever program that they might be able to establish for training, that then if you leave the state, if you leave Illinois and go to work somewhere else, what they would like to be able to provide is that your certification goes with you, that it becomes more kind of a national certification. So in terms of next steps and implementation, I mean, we have a lot of obviously moving pieces here. The state library is supportive of this. Heartland is kind of, they're in the middle of doing their strategic plan, so obviously they have to get that done. I think that we're a little, we're wrestling with implementation. It might be rolled out as a trial to see how it works with different sizes and types of libraries. Not really sure about that all yet. That's something that the committee will be discussing in July. I hope that was helpful, Cindy.
It sounds fantastic. That's really wonderful.
All right.
Yeah.
I was just going to quickly say.
Yes, sorry, Veranda. I kind of took over here.
No,
but
I wrote all this down.
Okay, well, go ahead.
You said it all. You and Angela.
That's true.
I'll say one, Cindy, thank you for your question because it lets me talk again. In regards to your question, I did, in our exploratory meeting with ALA, they do have experience working at a state level outside of this national work they do for personal members. It's my understanding they have worked with Oklahoma on this kind of a program in helping them track and provide, deliver training for certification at a state level.
And I guess I should state the obvious, which is that the system would, is going to finance this. I mean, this is our job to provide this assistance to member libraries. So we want to make it as easy as possible for people to participate.
And just one more thing, just by, you are all aware, probably from hearing from both Amanda and myself and our other colleagues, this would not replace the agency certification required by the Illinois State Library annually at that March 31st deadline. So this would be a certification of an individual as opposed to an agency, training and certification of an individual.
This is Penny at Rockford.
Yes.
This is Penny Miller at Rockford Service Center. I have a couple, 3 or 4 questions.
Okay.
Who is going to approve these standards? RAIL's members or the RAIL's board?
Question.
Second question is, once the standards are approved, will each library be evaluated before the standards are put in place so we know where we stand to the new standards? And then how long would we be given to get in compliance with the new standards? And is RAIL's going to put some punch behind these standards that if libraries aren't meeting them, would they lose their library membership? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll take a crack at that, but I'm sure maybe Kathy wants to discuss it. I think that the board will approve these, and perhaps at some point they will be in the administrative rules. That's where they should be. Will libraries be evaluated beforehand? I don't think we've talked about that.
Yeah, we haven't had that conversation.
No.
Not out loud.
Compliance and punch. Well, I mean, we know that there needs to be teeth. I mean, that is the word that we have been using.
The committees
we do know that libraries will need time, but as you just heard, Alex was making the point that, as time goes by, a lot, damage can be done. So what's the right amount of time to get into compliance? And the punch, well, yes, we have to figure out what that is, but we have to be sure that we give people a reasonable amount of time to comply, because taking away system services is a serious thing.
Apparently, Lorraine's person didn't understand what you were saying.
Siri did not understand.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that question. And thank you for bringing up some issues that we obviously need to discuss.
Yeah, those are definitely, ultimately, I believe as a board member that this is a board initiative.
Right.
And so the board would be approving it after much feedback from our members. And certainly the other things, we know there's a lot of people in libraries that maybe aren't meeting the minimum, the basics. But I will say, after given the data that we received from IPLAR, a majority of our librarians are meeting those standards. So there's an
public,
impression that isn't the case, but in Rails, that is the case. That a majority of our professionals leading the libraries are meeting standards. So I don't think this is going to be as big of a problem or big as an issue as people think it is.
And I want to also say again that this has been intended from the start to be a statewide initiative. Rails kind of convened the conversation. As I said, Heartland is, they have some things that they have to do first, but
they've been on. I mean, we do have a Heartland representative on the committee and a state library employee on the committee as well, to have them in the conversation.
So, other questions?
Dee, I have one here in Kankakee. Actually,
Yes.
I guess it's a little bit more of a statement. As you move forward with this process, I would recommend taking into consideration on-the-job experience. In my view, a person freshly out of library school, I don't think is prepared to run my library. And to just say they have an MLS is not going to do it. In my experience, this might seem a bit upside down, but we're a medium-sized library surrounded by communities with a lot of small libraries, and I have seen the MLS be much more vital and have much more of an impact on those little libraries than the larger ones. For example, in our library, we have a lot of intelligent people who have a lot of resources to one another to make sure that no damage is done. They have my staff I'm the only one with an MLS, and they've kept me from doing damage on several occasions. And the smaller libraries, their board members tend not to be people with professional backgrounds, so they're not able to watch things quite as closely or have as much background knowledge. And they're more likely to get, mom used to work part-time at the library, let her be director. And I know that they don't have the funding for it and stuff, but I've seen a couple of startup libraries around here who floundered. Then they finally got an MLS and they were able to get on track and get going. Where the larger libraries, when you've got a whole crowd of people together who are able to help one another, that one person who knows how to do everything is not quite as vital.
That's a very interesting point. It's very interesting, and I don't disagree with you, and I think what we are trying to put into place is an acknowledgement that small communities or small organizations can't necessarily afford an MLS, but to provide the training that will keep them from doing damage. But you make a very interesting point.
That's important. What I have tried to provide for the communities around Kankakee is to let them know that they can call me, that I can help them, I can give them some ideas as well. But and for the larger libraries, I would also say, just an MLS doesn't cut it, because I would be, in fear if they found, our library was able to afford a 25-year-old who just got their MLS and they think that they can run this library. I don't think it's likely. Thank you.
I agree.
And I think we have to realize, too, that it isn't just the small libraries who maybe can't afford that. There's larger libraries who can afford to hire people with degrees and whose boards are comprised of professionals that maybe aren't meeting any of the standards that are out there either, other than 15 hours a week. So it isn't just about the small libraries. It's really about all libraries within the Rails membership, that in order to serve our patrons the best that we can, we have to have, people who understand what it takes to run the library, what it takes to provide these services.
So other questions or comments? Do we have any questions from streamers, Ann or Mary, at this point? Nope.
Nope, none so far.
All right, well, we'll give it a little time. Do we have other questions or comments from any of the sites at this point? I will say again that I know that there's a lot of moving pieces here. We've thrown a lot of information at you because there's a lot of information to be given. I apologize that we can't be more specific, but I think you can also probably tell from when we do get specific, then people have questions about that. I mean, this has been a very, it's gnarly, but it's we're getting there, I think. This was a very important next step in helping us to get more specific and to kind of firm up some of our thoughts and assumptions. As I said, there is a committee meeting on July 13th. What else do we want to say at this point? Kathy or Veranda, or anybody who's on the committee?
I would say we always appreciate your feedback, and feel free to email any of us, and we'll be sure to get it to the committee. And if you have any questions, happy to talk to anyone.
And I apologize for the technical difficulties. I think we will, I think Veranda and I will put together a synopsis, okay?
Okay.
That we can send out so everybody, well, I think we have
No,
to.
it's a good idea.
Yep.
Just, especially it's the streaming problems, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah. So,
It'll be helpful.
So any other questions or comments at this point from anywhere? I will say that our next member update is going to be on September 17th. I don't have a time for that, but it will be on September 17th.
Dee, I have a time. It's 1:30 to 3:30.
Thank you, Mary. I thought you might. Well, I want to thank all the members of the committee for all their work. I want to thank all of you who spoke today on behalf of your committees in particular. I want to thank our chair, Kathy Parker. I think I'm going to, going once, going twice. We're getting ready to adjourn unless anybody has anything else at this point. All right, then. Thank you very much, and we'll be signing off.